This is a Talking Game Vision Summit, obviously. This was a half-hour talk there, so I'm really going to be blasting through it. So I'll be back here. Really going to be blasting through this. So to talk about level design in room scale VR, so specifically on the Vive, but obviously there'll be more things like this in the future. So first off, hello, I'm Jono. I'm going to skip over this because I've talked to most of you guys already. Here is the project. If you haven't seen it before, it's a world-building app in VR where you're creating the environment inside VR. Like Jeff mentioned, it's over on demo right there, so you can check it out today. We have a bunch of tools to manipulate the environment, do some meta building, like walls and that kind of thing, as well as lately I've been working on in VR visual programming, which this video barely touches on, so I'm just going to skip ahead. So that's fine. I'll say just a couple of things about dealing with room scale VR to begin with. Most people say that room scale VR, most devs think about room scale VR as I'm standing here and I can turn all the way around 360 and I can deal with some things at the edge of the room, but I'm not going to go too far because I don't want to trip off the chaperone, which is the thing that keeps you in the room. Super reasonable way to do it. I, however, am not looking to do it the reasonable way. Sorry, first off, here's a video of what I think of as most room scale VR these days. Where you're in a room, you're in kind of a boxy room, and you're dealing with some interactions, and you have some buttons, you have some physical objects, whatever interactions that you're doing in the room. Yeah, not a very sensible room here. But what I'm interested in is room scale that makes you walk around the room and really take you on pathways and make you cover a large landscape. So that's what this is about. And the assumptions there to cover are you need to have a good amount of tracking space. As you see in the corner back there, we have a bunch of feet square. I'm not sure how big that space is. And this is good for experiences that are procedural, like Dr. Claw was talking about, or that are installation-based, or that, like in my case, are user-generated, so content creation is not a big issue. And here's kind of an example of what I'm talking about, where I start in the corner up here, and I'm walking through this whole path, rather than just being in the middle of the room and dealing with everything in the center. So most of this talk is about how you can pull that kind of thing off, namely by directing the player around. Everything I talk about here is also applicable to AR. AR is kind of a superset of room scale VR, which is a superset of what you can do on seated VR. So just point that out. And you have to put the room in the same place every time. You'll see why as I go through some of these examples. Yeah, which means you can't teleport around the room freely as you can in a lot of VR demos. I can do alt spacing. Hey. And no joystick movement, period. Thought steps okay, but no joystick movement. So, about placing the player. You always have to know where your player is because you can't have them start inside the middle of the wall because it feels really bad for your brain. And in terms of level design, you can't have them starting on the wrong side of the level, on the wrong side of the wall because it breaks your level design. So that's kind of the key here. So we have to make the player get to where we want them to be. And there are a few ways to do this. One of them is super obvious. It's just to have interactions in the room, like buttons or things I pick up. The player's going to want to go like, oh, hey, look, beer, I'll have some of that. Or they're going to want to go check out anything they can interact with in the room. So you can just give them a button or something. So I'm starting in this big open room because I don't know where the player's going to start, and I come and hit the button, and because I know where the button is, I know the player's going to start in the far corner in that room. Because I said you have to hit the button to get to that room, so therefore I know where the player is when they hit the button. An even more simple example is just telling the player to go stand somewhere. Like, go stand on this pad and the level will change. Think of that like an elevator, you go stand on the thing, and the door's closed, and the door's open in a different place. In my app, it's just like an abstract teleport pad. It could be pixie dust, whatever fits your narrative. So, for example, here in my app, you have this little circle that's like, if you don't stand on this, zoop, it transports you back to a different room. So again, you know where the player's going to be because you told them where to be. You told them to go stand in that spot. So that's really easy. A weirder one that I've been playing with is making the player have an eye line into the next room they want to go to. So they have to see where they're going, which means that you can kind of make the player dodge around walls and stuff. So in this demo, again, I start in a big open room because you never know where the player's going to start. But then as they get deeper into the environment, they have to like come to the edge of the room and peek around a wall. Or later you'll see that like I have to be in the very corner of the room in order to see where I'm going, and then I can go to the next room. So this has an example I want to highlight in a second. So I go into this room. I'm still kind of in the center of my space. You can see my physical space here. And then here there's a little secret where if you step all the way to the edge of the room, you can see this one. And then, because I know where you are in the edge of the room, I can stick this big wall in the middle of the room that the player is going to have to walk around. And I've shown this here a few times, and no one's ever walked through the wall. So that works really well. Like, your brain doesn't want to go through walls. Your brain feels really weird if you try to stick it through a wall. So it's cool to experiment with once you're able to tell the player where to be. There are some problems with this approach, namely that it's hard to keep the player oriented, and also any changes you make in one room will affect how you can get into every other room, so it has this kind of knock-on ripple effect as you change rooms around. So that's not the best thing. I'll come back to some solutions for that in a second. So I want to look at a few examples out of Valve's robot repair demo, which is really cool, and sorry for the spoilers for anybody who hasn't seen it yet, but it's super cool. So first off, they have 3 interactions that make you go to a place. The first is stick your controller in this doohickey, the next is go open this drawer, and the next one is go pull this lever. And all 3 of those happen on different walls around the room. So the player is really forced to go to each of these places, like I've been talking about, making the player go somewhere to interact with something. And it has the bonus of really making the player feel safe in this area because they have now walked around the whole room, they get it, they're like, oh, I can walk. So then that opens up what you can see in the next slide of actually being able to move the player around that space using some intimidation tactics. We have these 2 big robots that come into the room, and the player like, oh, I have to get out of the way. And then you have the floor panels drop out of the bottom of the room, which again kind of scares the player back. So these are all 3 examples of pushing the player backwards rather than pulling them forwards. So between all of this, I've kind of come up with the 3 verbs of getting the player to move around, which are you can attract them somewhere, which mainly happens through interactions. You can repel them from some place, which mainly happens through animations, robots. And you can restrict where they can go, which mainly happens through walls or any other kind of thing that will stop the player from going across the room. A hole in the ground, or just some big prop in the room, whatever you want. And the second big chunk of this, how much time do I have here? 4 minutes. Okay, cool. Second big chunk of this is kind of doing landscapes. And you can think of the sightlines example that I showed earlier as kind of fitting this category as well. But my favorite thing to do, and the main thing that I'm demoing today, is non-Euclidean layout, which is super cool. It means that the environment changes while the player's not looking at it. Hopefully they're not looking at it. And that means that you can walk around a big virtual space continuously without having these like breaks between different rooms, without having these teleports, which is really, really nice. So it looks like this. A few of you have already tried this tonight. But you'll see here I'm in the center of my physical space. I walk around the corner, and now in the center of the space, again, is this button here, which is different. And then I walk back where I was, and there's this brick that I can pick up back in the area I was already in. So in a nutshell, that's what non-Euclidean locomotion is all about. It's just wrapping a big area into a small area in the room. And then for one more example, I come over here, and I punch the button, and then I turn back, and again, it's a different room over here. So, spoiler for the demo, but that's going to happen. And it's really cool because it's easy to design, because it doesn't have that attribute of the rippling changes that I was talking about with the previous example, sightline example. And it's also easier on the player because it doesn't disorient them so much. I've heard some people feel a little weird of like, whoa, that room's different, what happened? Where'd the room go? But I think for the most part, people are okay with it. It might not make sense in what you're doing as a negative, and it can be harder to kind of give the illusion of a big landscape because you have to have these walls and blockers in the room with the player, so it can be a little more difficult to, like you saw in the sightline demo, there's like a big open area, it can be a lot harder to pull that off. Another thing you can do is kind of pack a bunch of virtual rooms into the larger physical room, so you can think of these as 4 different rooms with doors in between them. And it's less disorienting, and you can use this with all the other things. And when you do get to a big room, it feels really big, whereas if you just like had a bunch of big rooms in a row, it kind of loses the effect a little bit. And you can also use this in the hypothetical future where you can have more than 2 sensors in a room. Say it's even a crazier shape than this. Say you had like a U-shaped apartment, you can fill it all up with these little virtual rooms that you can kind of semi-procedurally pack together, and in that way kind of deal with non-square layouts. Another thing you can do is get really big. And when you're really big, you can cover whole rooms at once. Just take a few steps and you're across the space. So here I've mapped this entire landscape to be at giant mode, the size of my whole office here. And then, again, because I know where these dots are, I can click on any one of these dots to teleport there. That also is a way to place the player, because I know, okay, the player had to stand in the center of the room to hit that one, or they had to stand in the corner of the room to hit that one. So you always, again, know where the player is when they enter a new room. The other thing you can do is the reverse of that, where you scale the world down rather than scale yourself up. Strangely enough, World in Miniature is a really well-established academic VR concept. It's been around for a long time, but we don't really see a lot of it in current VR. Can anybody correct me about that? I can't think of any modern VR apps that do this. The closest example I've seen is Fantastic Contraption. They have this little model of the world. You don't use it for locomotion, so that's why I kind of discounted it here. But it is good for getting a sense of how big gaps are in space. So check that out. So in conclusion, yeah, I got a few assumptions in there, which were, yeah, no joysticks, and the rooms always have to be in the same place. So about that point, all these examples you saw, like if I have a walking path through the room that is kind of mapped to the size of the room, if the player were able to freely teleport like 2 feet over, then that pathway would be going through a physical wall now. So that's why you always have to know where the room's going to be. The room always has to be in the same place relative to the physical space. And then you push the players around by pulling them towards interactions, pushing them away from scary things, or restricting them with some sort of wall mechanism. And then in terms of types of navigation, again, you can have eye line between different rooms, this non-Euclidean wrapping of rooms, packing little rooms into the big physical space. You get really big, or the room gets really small. The world gets really small, I should say. There's some other really good examples out there you should check out. Unseen Diplomacy is super cool, and they do a lot of the exact things we're talking about here. I don't know if it's actually coming out, but there was a game jam, and it was really cool, so I hope they really do it. The gallery, called the Starseed, they do like a big landscape that you can teleport around, and I think they both have free teleportation and also like cinematic blink points where you go there and they have like a preset thing for that room. Hover Junkers is a little different because the room itself doesn't change, but your room is flying through a big landscape, so super cool. And then Budget Cuts is awesome, just like portals that you can pull over your head, but it's essentially a teleporter, but just much, much more feedback. Beep, beep, beep. So this is, again, a half-hour talk at Vision Summit, and it's on YouTube. If you go to the Vision Summit Vision VR AR Summit channel, you can find a recording of this that is not super rushed. So, thanks.